Good morning, everybody. This is Nick. It is finally June 3rd, 2023. Getting started a little bit later for today, but that's okay. Once again, does anybody have any questions or anything that they saw over the week? Doesn't have to be necessarily related to what we talked about last week, or on Monday, which I was not here for, but any topics that are on anyone's mind and wanted to get some more spiritual insight or otherwise into those topics. No problem. Does anyone remember what the last thing you were talking about was if you were here on Monday, if you actually had class on Monday, since Monday was a holiday? Or if it was, I forget which weekend Memorial Day was. Okay. So what I would like to talk about is the Shema. And I'm going to pull it up just so I can have the actual words in front of me. So the Shema is a prayer that you may have heard, and it is something that has a deep sort of metaphysical and spiritual meaning beyond the surface level. And of course, that's why we're even looking at anything in the Bible, is to understand what the sort of deeper spiritual and metaphysical meaning is. So the Shema is in, let's see, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. So here we go. The Shema in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one." And that's the core of it. But let me see if I can see it in Hebrew, because in Hebrew, it's a bit more revealing. Let's see. So the Shema in Hebrew is Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. So immediately, when we hear the very first word, hear, what it is referring to on the metaphysical and spiritual level is the inner ability to perceive the movement or the vibration of spirit when we put ourselves in the place of receptivity to it. When we can quiet the sort of background noise that is usually happening in our own thoughts on a conscious and a subconscious level, so that we are able to perceive or feel a more subtle movement or vibration that we experience as a feeling. So like when we say we felt something in the air, or we felt something was wrong, or we feel something about a person, that is that experience of a feeling of a particular emotion or sort of movement or vibration of mind that we are able to translate into something useful for our experience. And that kind of experience is the same thing that is being spoken about when it says the word here. It is an internal attuning yourself to be able to accurately feel the influence of the more subtle essence of the self, which is connected to the creator. And that pattern, or that ability anyway, is one of the foundational or fundamental principles that we learn to develop over the course of our spiritual development, over the course of our investigation into the nature of our own self. And is that ability to hear is also what is being referred to when, of course, we hear or we read the phrase, if you have ears, if a man have ears, let him hear. There are always sort of multiple levels on which these things or these phrases have meaning, and each of those sort of layers of meaning correspond to our own understanding of our own self. And essentially we can take the meaning that is most beneficial for us from whatever that particular teaching or phrase is, one that corresponds to our own degree or depth of experience. So someone who is not as familiar with the sort of inner teachings, or rather their own relationship with their own self, when they hear the word here, they take it more literally. But someone who is more familiar with the true nature of their own self and the fundamental sort of concepts that these things are speaking to, and what they ultimately are resonant with in terms of our own experience and ability, spiritually speaking, when they hear the word here, they can understand it to mean that which I've just described. That ability to perceive a subtle movement of spirit that is informing us of basically whatever it is we want to be informed of. And the ability to quiet our sort of mental, emotional, and physical environment even is something that is one of the necessities, essentially, for learning to develop that ability to hear. And it's entirely possible that we get little bursts of that kind of experience throughout our lives, even if we're not sort of consciously attempting to do so. Like, you don't have to be sitting down and trying to meditate in order to hear, but it is more likely that you will develop that ability to do so more often if you consciously try to cultivate that inner peace, etc. So far, does that make sense? Any reactions to what I've described so far?
So Nick,
Uh-huh.
when you were talking about the verse that says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear," you were not talking literally, you were talking figuratively, because the hear you were talking about is an internal hearing. Is that, did I get that right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Almost like an internal receiving.
Absolutely. And it can be experienced in a variety of ways the more you refine your ability to perceive that sort of subtle movement of spirit. It can be as it can be a subtle feeling, more of an impression, all the way to something more as precise as what you might perceive as actual words being translated in your own head. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that you hear them, but you will, for example, know what exact precise words that particular subtle movement of spirit is attempting to translate through you. So it's a process of learning to refine your own ability to be aware of that subtle inner voice, that still small voice that we've spoken about before, which is what we are always trying to hear and to be in constant communication with. And that voice is us. It is the creator, or our connection to the creator, and what that connection is communicating.
Nick, this is Evelyn. I noticed that it says to hear and not listen. What's the difference?
Good question. In this case, I think it was referring specifically to that inner ability, whereas listen may have more to do with the physical act of attempting to hear sound. But depending on how that word is used, it could mean something similar. In this case, I think it's, as I said, specifically pointing to that inner ability, because listening implies kind of that there's something more obvious to be heard, whereas hear is more fundamental. It is something that has to be focused on. It is something that has to be recognized. It's like a sense you have to reawaken, as opposed to listening, which is a sense you already have that you can just use more readily. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm. And that's my impression of the distinction between those two.
But Nick, this is your mom, Audrey.
Hi, Mom.
Does the hearing also though involve a certain knowing with experience? I'm just trying to think of the circumstances of when this was said to them. Was this in the where did this happen? Where did it take place?
This is in Deuteronomy, so this is, where was this? Pretty early. But,
Deuteronomy 64, you mean, when the Shema first starts?
yep. Hey, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. This is Sheldon.
Right.
I also had oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just in addition to add on to what Nick said, in regards to hearing versus listening, if you will, you can think of listening as just being instructed to do something, or just an example, instructed to do something, so one just goes about following those instructions. Whereas hearing, as you mentioned, Ms. Audrey, with knowledge, there is a knowledge and wisdom and an understanding that goes beyond just, for example, the words that were actually spoken. If you were thinking about it in terms of like listening or hearing to someone, or hearing listening to, in this example, the Lord, which, as Nick said, is ourselves. One of them is the deep knowing and understanding that is within, that goes beyond just that surface level that thing was said. There's a deeper understanding of a lot of underlying things that are put together. So you just are not told to do something. You understand why you're doing it, the implications, and it has so much more meaning, in a sense. Is a part of you. Not just something outside saying, here, like you're a robot, do this, do that. Things.
Yeah, Thank you.
Um,
Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. Sorry I'm late joining you guys. Phoebe's in the hospital. The idea of hearing, I don't know whether you said this or not because I just got on, but it also speaks to something that you're able to perceive. And that perception to me speaks, also lends itself to what Nick was saying about it's you who's doing the hearing, it's you who is perceiving. Because if it, as Sheldon said, it was just instructions given from the outside, you're just hearing words, but you have no clue as to the direction you're being led in, or you have no clue as to what you're being told to do, what it could result in. But when you hear it through perception, then you have some kind of idea of where you're headed with it. In religion, we listen. In spirituality, we hear. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you.
I have a question.
I just say,
I'm sorry.
well, I just want to say, no. Well, I would typically definitely give, but I'm only saying one small thing. You continue with your question from what Pastor Rich just said. As he said, to emphasize, with the hearing is a part of you. It's something that is internal and deep down. So it's something that is closer to you, something that you embrace. Miss Evelyn?
So is this not talking about hearing with your heart as well?
Absolutely.
You can hear, you listen with your ear, but you hear with your heart?
What's your heart?
Your thoughts, I mean, not your thoughts, your seat of emotions, your, I can't explain it. And I'm not talking about the little pumping muscle that we see in our body, but it's your soul.
Thank you.
You can't, yeah, what you're saying right now.
I knew it.
It's funny because you're explaining it that you do know it, which is ironic. But yes, that's the exact thing that we're talking about. It's not something that you're just pondering about or thinking in your head. You have this silent confidence about this thing that you feel very strongly about, and it's not. This is, like I said, is in your head. You feel it deep down in your soul, or deep down in your heart. You feel very strongly about it, like you just said. So, and it's funny because it can be subtle but strong at the same time, almost as if it's like very, very fortified in a confident way. But yes, you are explaining exactly what it is that we're talking about. So as Pastor Richard just said, yes, we know you know it. I'm finished.
This is Audrey again. I find it interesting that the verse just before that is talking about the land of milk and honey. So it's talking about, yeah, all the internal knowing of it.
Yep.
Remember what Pastor said about milk and honey a couple weeks ago. Can you expound on that again, Pastor?
Sure. Excuse me, when I was talking about the land of milk and honey, it's referencing the substance that flows, the milky substance that flows from the pineal gland, and the yellowish substance that flows from, I think it's the thalamus, into the solar plex. These substances are equal to, these substances are what the scriptures are talking about when he's talking about the land of milk and honey, because it flows into this place, this cavern, or this a cave, or if you want to call it this, what is that thing in the stable where Jesus was born in? The manger. The place flows into the place where the Christ is birthed, where the power to do what you were created to do, where it is birthed. And when you are in tune with your spirituality, it begins to flow back up your spinal cord, where it gives you spiritual insight. However, if it is going to flow, whether you're spiritual or not. If it's religious, then it stays there and has trouble getting back up the spinal cord, and it creates confusion within the depths of your psyche and in relationship to understanding the difference between what's spiritual and what's material. Maybe I hacked it up, but somebody can help me, I hope. Thank you.
Isn't what you're talking about the cerebral spinal fluid? That's the physical,
No.
no?
Oh, the cerebral spinal fluid is different than those two substances that flow from the thymus and one from the pineal gland. But what it is, there are tubes that comes from each one of them, and at the base of your skull, they cross over, and they begin to cross over back and forth until they get to the solar plex, and that's where the mixture takes place. That's where the milk and honey is indicative of masculine and femininity becoming one in that particular space. And when it becomes one, it brings into existence the depth of your desires, be they material or be they spiritual. It's the birthplace. And I know it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but this is talking about the flow of energy that takes on a physical form. And the physical form of that flow is seen as a yellow substance and a milky white substance, both of which are electrically charged. So both of them are energy. The cerebral fluid is always constant. It maintains a constant pressure between your skull and your brain, so that you don't, it forms a cushion, so that your brain does not bounce against your skull. And when it does, it's called a concussion. Does that help, Elvin?
Yes. I hear you.
Audrey?
So this is really talking about a real deep knowing that that Ein Sof is unity.
Ultimately, but it's also the process of getting to that point where you are one with that and you recognize yourself as that.
Absolutely.
And if you've ever seen, as Pastor Richard was just talking about, the crossing over or the intertwining of those two substances as they energetically make their way up your spinal column and physically. If you've ever seen the caduceus, that symbol that has the two intertwining serpents, going up the staff with the wings at the top, is a symbol of that same thing. So there's kind of a subtle distinction between that symbol, which is the two serpents intertwining and with the wings attached to it. And we sort of usually see that associated with maybe hospitals or health. And then there's another symbol, which is similar, which is a staff or a rod with one serpent being sort of wound around it as it goes up. That's another symbol we see associated with health or hospitals, but there's a distinction between those two. And they're often, I guess they were sort of conflated or a little bit confused as time went on, because the double serpents with the wings is more explicitly spiritual. Although that, of course, does relate to your health, because the health of the body is a projection of the health of the spirit. Whereas that other symbol with the single serpent wrapped around the rod with no wings or anything is more directly related to physical health. Although it's a similar concept.
Yeah, because the original, the one with the wings, had its origin in Egypt.
Yep.
And in the beginning, it spoke to spirituality, spiritual health, period. And with the growth of what's his name, Imhotep, and medicine, it became a symbol of both, because as was seen during that period, the physical health and the spiritual health were intertwined. They were both dependent and interdependent on each other in order for that entity, meaning the human, but itself to remain healthy and at the same time have a healthy relationship rather with the one who brought it into existence. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's no other questions on that, the next part of the Shema, after the word Shema, which is here, is Israel. So we probably talked about the meaning of the word Israel a variety of times. Basically, it means to struggle or strive in the direction of the Creator. So it is bidding all those who seek to know the Creator and to know themselves as a part of that process, because those two are the same thing, to rely on your inner ability to hear the influence and the messages you receive from your connection to spirit, from yourself, because you are spirit. And if you are able to rely on that and hear, then you may properly call yourself a child of Israel, one who seeks to know, one who strives in the direction of the Creator and of the self. So that is a spiritual designation originally. And of course, it becomes later on social and political, but that is basically the process of all religion, is to attempt to physicalize or reduce essentially the significance, the spiritual significance of the original transmission.
Syra Fuller Calvin.
Oh,
Sorry.
make sure. Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay. Thank you. So Shema Israel. Listen within all those who would or who do seek to know the Creator. Because it is from your ability to listen within that your sort of path shall be set, that your instruction shall come, that your confirmation shall be received. Now, the sort of concept of Israel comes out of Egypt in the same way that the sort of Jewish mystical tradition comes out of Egypt. And this is Egypt long before the Bible was written, because even Egypt itself went through a process of sort of religious downfall, as everything does over time. But the concept was one that was had its origins in the mystery system that people who eventually became known as the Jewish people would have been in contact with in and around the Middle Eastern region, because basically the entire world at the time was aware of the depth of knowledge present in African Egypt. And peoples, as they would come and go, would either through various means be able to take away things that they had learned while in and around the Egyptian region. So all of these concepts are sort of retranslations, in some sense, reinterpretations of the quote unquote original teachings of the from master to student that were intended to guide the student in the direction of the true nature of self and in the direction of the perception of the mystery concerning the nature of the self, reality, and the creator. All of those things being spiritual. And I say quote unquote original teachings because they are timeless. There's no one original source. Though in this cycle of time, most of what we are talking about was focused in the Egyptian Middle Eastern region, basically for the beginning of maybe what we would call modern history. But those teachings are, of course, as I said, timeless and much older. Anyway, does that make sense? Anyway.
Yes.
So in the Shema, when I was originally saying it, I said Adonai, but that's basically what you say when you don't want to pronounce Yahweh or the YHWH or YHVH. That is the name that is used in the Shema. So hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one. So as we've spoken about, the YHVH is the, well, I'll speak about it this way. We know Yeshua is YHVH with the addition of the Hebrew letter Shin in the middle. Shin is the fire. It is the fire of the heart that enlivens and accelerates the process that is being described in Yahweh, YHWH. And as I stated some weeks ago, that all Hebrew names are themselves formulas for consciousness. So it is the children of Israel, in this case, all those who seek to know the nature of the Creator and therefore themselves, who must hear in order to know that it is Yahweh or YHVH or YHWH is the method, is the path along which to travel that you yourself enliven and give life and energy to with the addition of your own spiritual heart. So it says, Yahweh is our God. And I believe that's in Hebrew, Yahweh Eloheinu. In other words, the thing you strive after is found along the path described by YHWH, by the formula for consciousness that is Yahweh, that is a part of you. And it is through learning to listen to that inner voice, that transmission occurs along that pathway. So we've talked about how the word Elohim is plural, or Elohim is essentially the who we were and are before becoming fully ensnared in physical material experience, and who we are attempting to reawaken, or rather attempting to realize ourselves as we travel this path. So in this case, it'd be singular, I believe, where it says Yahweh is our God in English, and then Yahweh Eloheinu in Hebrew. The true nature of the self, which is Elohim, is found through the spiritual path, YHWH, which is enlivened, or energy and fire is brought to by you. Question.
Yeah, I have a question. So what we're learning, does it stimulate the pineal gland?
Oh, yes. The pineal gland is basically always stimulated, but this is a process of, you can hear, you can hear a radio station, but you don't hear it very well. There's static, it's weak. And if you attune it better, you can hear it much more clearly. If you get closer to the source, it becomes much more stronger. It's a little bit like that. So the pineal gland is never not active. Your spirit and all the different energy centers, like we've spoken about the chakras before, they're never not active. But it is a process of learning to fully activate them so that they become something that is, well, I'll leave it there. The spiritual journey is a process of knowing the self. It is a process of healing, balancing the energy that you are, and learning to fully be the true nature of who and what you are, which is Elohim. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. So there may very well be flashes or periods where you have greater insight, greater activation, quote unquote, sense of greater connection, more clarity, more balance as you travel this path. And there'll be periods where you don't feel that. And that's just the back and forth that we learn how to balance, that we learn how to move through along the process of learning to remain fully awake and aware, so to speak. So Yahweh is our God. And the very last sort of statement of the Shema, Yahweh is one, or Yahweh Echad in Hebrew. And that is a very densely packed, metaphysically, spiritually rich statement. Yahweh is one. The path back to the self is the recognition that all things are one. The true nature of the self, of the creator of the universe and the infinite universes that are produced by it, is that we are all one and the same thing, quote unquote. So the purpose of balancing the self, the purpose of learning to know the self, is to recognize our, and sort of live and feel our very real connection to all other things. It is rebuilding our sense of connection to other parts of our own self. spiritually speaking, also physically speaking, because all physical things are, of course, projections of spirit. So the more you can perceive, can learn to hear what is being transmitted to you from you, the more you will be able to live that experience of the connection to everything that appears to be not you, at least physically. And as a simple example, that's how you can know other people's thoughts. That's how you can know exactly what is going on with somebody else if they have, for example, health issues, even if they don't know it, and you can tell them. That is how you can perceive accurately the meaning of other people's dreams, because it's not other people, it's you. And you putting yourself in their position are able to, in the case of dream interpretation, interpret their dreams as if it was you doing the dream, you having the dream. But it is the intuitive awareness of what that other person's circumstances and feelings are that allows you to interpret that dream as them, as a sort of simple example. But the more fundamental truth there is Ehad, one. All things are one. The spiritual journey is the path to the realization of the oneness of all things. Not on an intellectual level, but on a spiritual, experiential level. Questions?
Nick, this is Pramel. I have one.
Mm-hmm.
While you're explaining this being one, so that means even with individuals who are racist, rape, steal, we're part of that oneness with them? They're all part of that.
Absolutely. The capacity to do those things is also present within you. Not the desire, but the capacity. And it is through the recognition that that capacity is also a part of the creator. That is, in some cases, difficult to to deal with. Now, it doesn't mean those things are good, but they are a part of the creator. And specifically, the parts of the creator that the creator needs to learn to not do. We, as the creator, expressed in physical material reality, are in that process of figuring out how to stop doing that stuff.
How not to desire it?
Pretty much. Did someone else have a question? Yeah.
So can I take my question one step further?
Mm-hmm.
What I hear is that even though we have the capacity, it's through our desire not to do those things that we can help others not desire it.
In the sense of the macro, yes. Through learning to understand the source of those desires and behaviors within ourselves, and not implying that we necessarily want to do them, but understanding that all negativity essentially exists on that same spectrum. Learning the source of all of those things within the self, and then healing and bringing balance to those things within ourselves in whatever capacity that we need to, is the process of healing that on a macro level. Spiritually speaking.
Yeah, to try to also, I guess, talk about that a little bit more. So as Nick is saying in terms of that desire, and we have the capacity, just want to make sure it's clear that you're not just denying that desire or saying I can't have that desire. Is a process that goes in from an individual standpoint of actually, as he said, healing and working past that desire, but is work on your part, on an individual's part, that gets you beyond having that desire, not just saying I'm cutting this desire off. As that desire exists, period, it is because an individual falls under of not understanding, in some way not being happy where they are, etc. And so it is actually a natural part of one seeking to get out of that position or to actually move beyond that, whether they know it or not. So with the learning and understanding of the desire, you understand, as Nick said, healing beyond that point. And it's almost as if that energy is rechanneled. It's rechanneled in several ways, for example. Usually when you have that desire that Nick just talked about with those individuals, for example, who want to be very destructive, that in a sense is where they are and where they think is actually needed in their way to get beyond that. Understanding more, you come to a place where that's no longer needed, or there are other ways to get beyond that are now understood, which are healthier ways. So all of it is a learning process. And as he mentioned, in terms of being on a spectrum, we ourselves have those same certain desires in other ways. We just no longer look at it in the same way. But we're all working those things. We're all better understanding those things. Is one of the things we're doing here in this earth. We serve as the creator, understanding these things and experiencing them better. I'll finish. Does any questions, or does that make sense what I just said?
Makes sense.
Thank you, sir. Yep. All of the depths of negativity that are possible are also things that must be understood. Unfortunately. That doesn't mean you have to do them, but it means they will occur at some point, somewhere in physical manifestation, because all possibilities are part of the infinite unity of the creator. Therefore, it must contain everything that we would term good and everything that we would term bad. But there is a, let's say, a bias that reality itself has towards those things that we would call good, or those things that are good. So religion likes to describe this, like, and definitely in terms of Christianity, there's some sort of struggle between God and the devil. And that is a very simple concept, and as a result of what sort of the religious interpretation of these what these concepts is. There is no struggle between the creator and anything, because all that exists is the creator. All that exists is you. These things are things within us that we are learning to figure out, to stop reproducing things that are negative in whatever way we do, and learn how to heal those, the source of our desire to reproduce anything negative in the first place. As I think I said at some point before, it is impossible to kill the devil, quote unquote. You can't do it.
Can't stomp him under my feet.
Unfortunately, no. That is a religious concept. not a spiritual one. I forget. I was watching some video or maybe it's a movie, but it was there were a group of people talking about an African proverb. It said it's impossible to kill an enemy or something like that. It's the same concept, because if you kill someone you perceive as an enemy, you'll make another one, and therefore you will always have an enemy. You can't kill the devil. There is only, spiritually speaking, the transformation of that which we perceive as negative into something positive. Because all things are one, you can't cut off a part of yourself. Just like Sheldon was saying. There's no you can't cut off your arm, spiritually speaking. You can only heal it. Now we try to do that, like, and religiously speaking, that's the whole concept of there being this ultimate battle between good and evil. I mean, in a sense, there is one, but ultimately that battle is within the self. There are no external actors there. Like I said, the creator is not fighting anything. There's only the true nature of the self. And whether or not we can accept all that is contained within the self and accept the burden of the responsibility to transform what it is we find within the self.
So
And that is
perception of the struggle comes from the struggle being our attempt to transform that which is negative into something that's positive.
that is the spiritual struggle, yeah. But religiously speaking, that is the confused idea that we need to fight in the sort of crude sense. Those things have to be fought. That is why moving the ideal state, going into a little bit of sort of social political stuff, the ideal state of America, according to the religion of the white supremacist religion of Christianity, just everything wrapped up within that, is one where there's a constant struggle between good and evil. Hold all that whole phrase in quotes, which basically plays out as people shooting each other in the street. Bad guys shooting people and then good guys shooting people. And just that happening for forever until Jesus comes back. Which is part of the reason they will do nothing to stop the violence on a fundamental level, because they want that, because that plays into this idea that there's good ultimately, quote unquote, and there's evil ultimately, quote unquote, and those things must fight in order for the good eventually to win, as opposed to healing the source of those problems. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, it keeps up the facade of the dichotomy of us and them. It's either them or us,
Right.
the good guys or the bad guys.
Yep. Only thing that does is allow you to continue under the illusion that the bad is not also a part of you. And that the part of you that represents must be healed in order for it to stop manifesting itself.
So how do
No.
you,
Oh, go ahead.
so how do you heal it?
Well, on a social political level, you deal with the conditions that allow for things like that to proliferate. So 99.9% of poverty is just, or of crime is just a result of the various complications and traumas that occur with poverty, globally speaking. So you heal the situation that allows for those things to even rise up within people.
Nick,
For example.
this is Rainia.
Mhm.
I was watching this TV show last night, and it talked about the Joshua generation. I'd heard the referenced before, but it was the first time I understood what it was. I don't know if you've heard of it, the folks who kind of raise these big families of homeschooled kids, very conservative, very right-wing extremists. So we've got, this group that's now hitting Congress and, hitting the Senate that has these very extreme beliefs that you're talking about, this, really almost racist, white, whatever, focused. I feel like there's this big organization that we're now kind of up against, even though they're fairly small, they're very organized. I guess our actions the same, That's my question. It's like going up. It's not David and Goliath per se, but it's going up against a group that's been playing this since the 80s, right? Trying to create this vision of America.
Yeah. It is. And this is all sort of social political, but as an extension of essentially the spiritual state of humanity and the United States and as a smaller subset of that. But yeah. Can you restate your question actually?
I guess you're talking about some actions we have. I guess I'm asking, do they apply still? How do we, I guess they do. Maybe I'm answering my own question. How do we, that it's that wrestling against the powers and principalities kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because even knows there.
Yeah. And it's the mindsets. In the case of the principalities, etc., there's more to it than that, but it is the mindset which is so difficult to change. It is what is in the macro that people draw from. That is what is so difficult to change, because that is the source of their continuation of the confusion and negativity. It's literally just, and again, this is socio-political. I'm going to pull it back to spiritual, but it's literally just, you raise the idea of, for example, limiting access to guns. Immediately people get nervous, confused, and afraid because of what they have absorbed out of the sort of obvious macro, which is basically just our sort of social and media space, what they see on the news, what they hear people say, etc. It's very easy to be frightened by those kinds of things if you yourself are ignorant of, a wider, a deeper understanding of humanity and the world. Literally, the reason that they will not do anything to limit access to guns is because they think that every single man, woman, and child needs to have one, or else essentially the Illuminati will, I don't know, destroy America or something. Guess what? That is already happening in whatever sense the Illuminati exists. And I don't want to get too much into that, but basically some version of that does exist. But whatever. All of this is changing the minds of people. The spiritual, emotional, and mental influence that people have, and the things that they seek out from the macro, are what shifts the consciousness of a generation, or what determines the consciousness of a generation in the earth. And then shifting that consciousness is from the same.
You could just explain the entire idea in terms of creating monsters and the idea of good and evil. Those people, just to give an example, have not taken accountability. Let's say, for example, of poverty. the hand that they actually have in the situation, and they just look at these people who are impoverished as being a problem. So that is exasperated, is continued because they're not addressing it, and they have painted this thing as being bad and not of me. And because it's bad and it's not of me, and I'm avoiding it, I'm not actually dealing with it. When in order to solve this is just for me to not look at it as bad or look at it as separate or look at it as a situation that I'm not going to say responsible for in the sense like I even caused it. It doesn't even have to be that much, just more so that I can play a role in stopping it, or I can actually care for this particular thing, and then the solutions to end poverty will automatically happen. That's in the same way that concept plays out first with us individually, spiritually, as Nick said before. The physical world is just a manifestation of what is actually happening internally. That dichotomy of one fighting the other or not accepting the other, and then just creating more monsters or problems because of that. I'm finished.
Yes, sir. So the resolution to all conflict is in the self. And it is through essentially influencing the macro that all people on the spiritual path are attempting to change or shift the minds of everyone connected to that macro so that they can begin to examine themselves. Because one of my favorite quotes from Native American spiritual and is Black Elk. One of my favorite quotes from Black Elk is, "The first piece, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all its powers. When they realize at the center of the universe dwells the Great Spirit, and that its center is really everywhere. It is within each of us." That recognition within the self is the foundation for all external harmony. And that is why the actions and the behaviors of the Europeans interacting with all different kinds of people was so shocking, because here Black Elk say something like that and then not be able to comprehend that he is a human being and that you can just sort of kill everyone that looks like him. You have to be at the furthest extremes of insanity, which they were. And that is exactly the principalities and etc. that all spiritual struggle is against. Learn to recognize those same things in the self, and you will master them outside of yourself. Rather, learn to heal and balance those things within the self, and they will be mastered outside of yourself.
Nick, you mentioned sorry, good morning, this is Janice.
Hey.
You mentioned insanity, and for some reason this morning I've been thinking about a gentleman I used to talk to on a regular basis who was kind and smart and cared about people that he knew and worked with. but at the same time, watched Fox News constantly and loved to start conversations about whatever he'd seen on television and the various people that needed to be handled or dealt with. And I really struggled to understand how he could be, this loving, intelligent person, but at the same time, be so caught up in political views that really did not align with his own personal values. And he couldn't see that, which is what made me think it is a type of insanity. And I know that it's not something that just happens to people who watch Fox News. Like I suspect it happens to people who are liberal as well. I haven't.
Yeah.
This complete disconnect from who they are and who they present in person with, like how they just turn all that off when they're watching. I'll just call it infotainment. I don't even know if it's really information. It's something.
It's just all propaganda at this point for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, that's thank you for bringing that up. That is there's no definition of insanity, but that is an example of it. It's the extreme cognitive dissonance that exists between what you think and what you actually believe. And in that case, I think it's just that's the thing going on since the beginning of America. Southern people, real polite. until you overstep your assigned position in the cosmic hierarchy, and then they, kill you. That's that same disconnect. And that's the disconnect between what you think and what you actually believe. The surface level niceties that you enjoy because it feels good give way to the deeper actual hatred when push comes to shove, because unless you have shoved yourself and dealt with those things within yourself that come up when that happens, they will always be there. If you get my meaning.
I do.
And that unwillingness to deal with that kind of deeper level actual negative behavior is basically just the result of fear of losing whatever your perceived position is. But that's the heart of why it's so difficult to address that, because the real thing that needs to be addressed is much deeper than those sort of pleasantries sitting on top. Like like every Trump supporter is exactly the same. They'll be real nice until you say the wrong thing, and they'll be like, "Oh, you gotta die."
I'm sorry, guys. I had to get off earlier. I just got back on a few moments ago, and I was listening to what Janice was saying, and I think that the person who was so influenced by the Fox infotainment, I think he called it, Janice,
Yep.
are far less dangerous than the liberals are, because of the facade that they put up. For example, when you think about what happened with this so-called debt agreement, how it was so easy for Biden to sacrifice the people who needed the support the most, especially those with student loan debt, in order to get what he wanted, and how easy it was for Obama and his administration to go along with the annihilation of Gaddafi, and at the same time have this surface sense of gentility and respect for humanity itself. This is so prevalent in the European influenced society until it's overlooked, except when it is perpetrated by those who are considered to have a Southern mentality or a Southern way of thinking. I'm done.
Thank you, sir. That's related to that story of I forget where it is, but Jesus cursing the fig tree. If you remember that one.
Yes.
Didn't curse the thorn bush, but the fig tree. Why? Because the fig tree wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, what it purported to do. Thorn bush is just the thorn bush. It's pretty obvious what that is. You can just avoid it. But a fig tree is supposed to help.
What does the fig tree represent, Nick?
Life, life-sustaining nourishment.
Hypocrisy.
What'd you say, Pastor?
Hypocrisy. Appearing to be something that you're not.
Yeah. And in that story, or in that parable, the fig tree was supposed to be giving life-sustaining nourishment, and because it wasn't, it got cursed. Because it was being hypocritical, being purporting to be something, and then not doing the thing that it was supposed to be doing.
Is that religion, a representation of religion?
Absolutely.
One thing I feel like I've dealt with a lot in terms of the difference just in the past few years is the idea of polite and niceness. And I guess starting off with the point that Pastor made when he was talking about Biden and Obama, to take it down to an individual level. Where I stay at in the area of Manhattan is one of the most liberal-leaning places. However, it's also a place where those same individuals will fight tooth and nail to keep people from the outer boroughs or minorities from being in the schools with their kids at the same time. The number one specialized public high school, which you have to test into here in New York, Stuyvesant, every year receives like 700 something, almost 800 students are offered. Last year, the number of Black students offered was 11, and now it's down to 7. And in a city where 2/3 of with the extremely liberal, but also 2/3 of the students are of Latin or Black descent, they only represent together like 10% of the students offered. Now, going back to the question in terms of religion and this seeming hypocrisy in terms of these two things, the Fox guy who's very nice and the liberal person who's very, very mean. And as it relates to religion, I always think about being taught to be polite. And it doesn't necessarily deal with the matters of the heart where you actually want to or genuinely doing it. Literally taught and raised to be fake in a sense. And the concentration or what it's the goal is to come off as being polite, not actually being nice. Also had this impression of, I think I mentioned before, a lot of people in New York just being mean and rude. And though they do not excel at being polite, they're actually extremely nice if you actually just follow what is actually taking place, just the typical New Yorker. Whereas Nick said in the South, very, very polite in manners until you step out of order. And okay, now we had to kill you. It was your fault. You stepped out of line. You did what you were supposed to do. But I always come back to thinking about that genuineness in terms of what someone truly believes in their heart and how they're being, how they're, I guess, leading or living their life versus what they think they're supposed to do, and or if it's a goal for them to actually present something that isn't really true to where, I'm gonna say where they are, not who they are, but where they are at that particular moment in their growth. I'm finished.
So in the South, when the patrolman pulls you over, he says, ma'am, you're going to jail for driving while being black. Bless your heart.
Yes.
Well, Armand already found out the hard way. They were very polite in the neighborhood until he crossed out of his lane. And then, yeah, he killed, literally.
Maybe we ought to say he
Bless
crossed
his
into
heart.
their lane.
Or their perceived lane.
Lane, yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, that the last thing, I don't know if I made it clear, that liberal idea, that person is happy to be to put on a facade as long as it is not affecting them or costing them anything. As soon as it's costing them anything, that's, as you can say, the true colors come out. Like, oh no, no, whoa. I didn't really mean that. Like, that's a good thing to almost to say, but I'm not necessarily, I don't have no plans of putting my chips in it or actually being involved in trying to help bring whatever thing about, whether it be equity or fairness or of that sort, whatever of that sort. I'm finished.
Thank you, sir. Yep. All of that disconnect between surface level politeness and what is actually in your heart when it gets, you're put in a position that makes you reveal it, is the same disconnect between the illusion of religion, of sort of material experience, versus the reality of spirit, or of the true nature of our connection to each other. And we stay in the illusion because it's very comfortable. We are very uncomfortable, collectively speaking, with dealing with the true depth of our insanity. And is explicitly dealing with that feeling of uncomfortableness, and then dealing with the nature of our confusion, that we collectively must engage with that process in order to reverse, or rather make our transition to a more harmonious time in the earth for all humanity an easier one. Like I've always said, I think we all make it, but we are determining how rough that transition has to be. And as the baby boomer generation essentially leaves the earth, they're going to get more, what's the word? They're going to kick and scream harder. And basically the generation after them is going to be more concentrated in terms of its insanity. I don't believe we're very far away from people calling themselves conservative or whatever, openly praising Nazis. Not that they don't do that kind of stuff anyway, but I mean, just dropping all pretense, specifically because we'll probably hear stuff like, oh, but the Nazis were Christian, and aren't we Christian? Aren't they just fighting for the same thing, which is, law and order, that kind of thing. We're starting to see some of that, but just not at a sort of open national level. I wouldn't be surprised if we get there. Really, actually.
Nick,
Mm-hmm.
said baby boomers, so you saying we dying off, we leaving? We trans-
Yeah, and it's, this is more of a gradual thing. It's not everybody at once, of course, but like that generation in the earth, in terms of the base of white supremacist control in the United States in particular, is leaving, kind of at a similar within a similar time frame. So the transition from whatever dominant mindset they represented to the one that comes after is going to be less gradual than I think change has occurred in the past. Although time goes so fast now that phrase might not even mean anything. But yeah, I mean, that power base, that mentality in the earth is on its way out. Just as every generation is eventually on its way out.
In Congress.
Yeah.
That time is speeding up, or time is going really fast now?
Oh, it did. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
And what determines that speed of time?
First of all, time basically doesn't exist. It's the more I learn about this from a spiritual perspective, yeah, it basically is not even a thing. But we exist within, let's say, a collective agreement to perceive reality a particular way. And that reality changes depending on whatever we collectively agree on the ground rules are. So, our perception of time currently is a bit simpler than that. It's just information moves faster. And so our rate of change is faster. And so that is basically what I mean for the social change, et cetera, that we're seeing and witnessing a transition of. But on a fundamental metaphysical spiritual level, time is entirely relative to perception, and even physics will say that. And it doesn't really exist outside of us, outside of our perception. So time very well can speed up because it is we who determine sort of what time is within the context of our awareness and perception.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think there's more to it, sort of metaphysically and spiritually, but I think that's basically how it works. When the sort of pace of evolution increases, we perceive time to, well, it appears that time is also accelerating.
Well, that has to be related to the flow of enlightenment as well, and it's our reception, our receptivity. I don't know what the right form of that word is, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Our relationship with enlightenment influences the flow of information and the rate of change, at least in society, that we experience.
Mm-hmm. I believe you are right. Yep. Because ultimately, on a deep spiritual level, we all want to get out of here. We're not, every single one of us knows on a very deep spiritual level that this is not where we're supposed to be. It is a transitional phase of existence. And it can be a rough transition or a smooth transition, whatever. But the point is, we're all trying to grow because we know we need to, generally speaking. And further along the path of growth, we have access to more information, etc. So the pace of growth also accelerates. So it becomes exponential. Within that, there's the danger, though, of course, because when things move more and more quickly, you have less control over the direction they move in if you are not able to, well, if you have not balanced and essentially refined yourself to be able to deal with that pace on an individual and collective level. That's why you get, forgive me, spiritual dum-dums who are so easily influenced by stuff like Fox News, etc. They are not on the level to deal with the way they are being propagandized because they don't know anything.
Yes.
They don't have the context of the world of humanity, of the development of human society, none of that. They just be seeing information and go, oh, that's true. And so it's very easy to accelerate in a very negative direction because if you're not savvy to the game that is being run, you just absorb things. You just suck it up.
Yep. It's great. I love it.
He just muted several. So
Were we a more balanced and harmonious civilization in the earth, well, collectively overall, the pace of acceleration would still be increasing, but it would be in a less chaotic way, because we don't have to deal with all these individual parts of our collective self that are still insane. Everything gets brought up in a more stable way. And on different planets where there are people doing the same thing we're doing, depending on the overall temperament of that civilization, that group of people, individually and collectively, there are different modes of evolution. There are different paces of spiritual evolution, technological evolution, etc. It just depends on essentially the personality and the spiritual development of the group of people.
Well, Nick, can we change planets? Have a different home room or something with the less crazy people.
Hey, that might sound funny, but yes.
Oh,
Well, if you the old white lady Dolores Cannon, who I found not too long ago, and I got some of her books. You can look up Dolores Cannon on YouTube if you want. But I think she is of the lights. She's good. But she talks about that Earth being, and I believe this is first off, anything I say in here, I believe because of a combination of my own experience and own understanding. But anyway, she says that Earth is a particularly difficult school, relatively speaking, to what is out there in terms of the various physical places to incarnate that there are. But I believe that there are other planets with similar personalities to us, but I think Earth in particular is one. I keep seeing this idea pop up amongst various people who are into those kinds of esoteric spiritual things, that Earth is unique in the universe in the sense that it is a very strange mishmash of all different kinds of people that isn't necessarily something that occurs generally on other planets. I'm not so sure how I agree with that. I'm not so sure if I agree with that concept. I think people being people will just always be different, even on the same planet, because everyone is different. So, personality and culture all diverges. But anyway, Earth is in particular a challenging place to be, where you incarnate if you know, or if you believe you can greatly accelerate the pace at which you are spiritually developing. And you want to take advantage of the challenge that it represents, if that makes sense. But you can.
There are those who say we chose this particular life
You-
experience. On this-
It is.
all the stuff in the macro.
That is, I want to emphasize this, that is 100% correct. And though that, we may have,
So you said quick wah wah.
we may have mixed feelings about it, that
That's-
idea, but, and that's not necessarily something we may believe initially, but, and I'm not asking you to immediately believe anything I say, of course. But I am suggesting to you that that is 100% the case. Nobody goes anywhere unless they choose to, and they choose to for a reason.
I saw something, I watch a lot of UFO kinds of stuff. And last night we were talking about in oh gosh, 40s, 50s, 60s, 40s, 50s, where in Russia, the UFOs usually follow the line of military bases and or nuclear facilities, et cetera, et cetera. But in Russia, where they had these warheads, they saw the ship, and the ship came over and it turned on their nuclear, it was about to launch their nuclear weapons. And everybody got all chaotic, all worried about it. Well, what would the United States? The United States would never believe that we didn't do this intentionally, blah, blah, blah. And it literally took control of the nuclear weapons. And then finally just left, and they breathed a sigh of relief, and then things continued on just as usual. Same thing happened in Colorado here in the United States at a different period, where a spaceship appeared near a nuclear facility, and it deactivated, it turned they did not have the capability to launch if they chose to launch. So I think that was telling them that, you think you're in control, but you're not really in control. So why are we using these kinds of weapons as threats against each other when there may be a power out there that's allowing us to just get to the edge, without totally destroying the human race. Anyway.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that. I do believe that is the case. Though I will say, if our collective desire is to destroy ourselves strong enough, they will let us. But I don't think that's gonna happen. There is somebody who I like to follow, is a man named Dr. Stephen Greer, and he was a medical doctor in the South who dated a black woman. He's white, but he dated a black woman back in the 70s. So that's how he's legit. He's on the side of I'm being facetious. He did date a black woman, but overall he's good. But he's from the South, and he does.
Not in the 70s. Not in the 70s.
But he does a lot of let's say it deals with the connection between the UFO phenomenon and spirituality, and on a national level is attempting to get basically military personnel to come forward, and has been doing that for years. He actually has a big sort of national press event next week, and I'm going to part of that event.
Wow.
So it is at the National Press Club, downtown DC, near the White House somewhere. I will be down there for the first part of that. And I think that is very significant because if you've been watching the news at all in the last year or so, the Pentagon and whoever is ramping up the rate at which they are giving us information about these kinds of phenomena, which I will say are very much a real thing. Everything you see in the sky is not them, quote unquote. A lot of it is us, quote unquote. Yeah, I think the reason the military industrial complex is leaking this kind of stuff is specifically for that. It's for their own nefarious ends or whatever. But Dr. Stephen Greer is one of the ones working against that sort of negative reaction to those kinds of things. Anyway, that is very much a real concept, a real phenomenon. And I myself have had experiences that basically confirm that. So I've never had what you might call an abduction experience, though I have had interactions with beings that look like what you would call extraterrestrials, definitely. But that is icing on the cake. All that I think will become more a part of our collective awareness as we make this transition away from essentially material, egotistical confusion and insanity.
All right, or we can flip it and the extraterrestrials that we probably are anyway.
Yeah.
The they, or the them, and then we more collectively become the us, which doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, I was told once, Janice, you were talking about, or I think it was Janice talking about picking the place you incarnate. I was told once that after a certain degree of development, you can choose to incarnate essentially into space. So you don't have to be attached to a planet per se, but you can incarnate into simply stating it, you can incarnate into a group of people aboard a UFO, and that becomes the place that you keep returning to as long as you need to return to the physical experience.
Love it.
So I could be your kid.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's a whole huge range of topics, I think, to go into that and what that actually is, that sort of UFO phenomena. It's very much related to spirituality and the nature of reality. And maybe we can do that more formally at some point. But yeah, it's very interesting and will become more and more part of our sort of collective awareness. Oh, and to that end, I will say, anywhere you hear, especially coming out of somebody speaking on the news, that there is the idea that they are a threat or that they're going to invade or something, that is wild propaganda. That is, understand when you hear that, that is the whatever version of the Illuminati actually exists, that is them speaking directly to us and trying to convince us of that fact. So this gets into the bit more things that are considered more conspiratorial. I don't want to go too far into that because if you don't have the proper context for that, it can become pretty distracting. But that is essentially what is happening. There is no, just like we were talking about, there's no war between good and evil in the religious sense. There is no war. There is no conflict between humanity and extraterrestrials. If there is anything on that spectrum, it is the extremely negative actors in the whatever version of the shadow government that exists, just basically being the same selfish jerks they have always been. It is not humanity overall. Anyway. How are you all doing? Any other questions or anything you would like to address today?
Such a good discussion. Barbara, I want your UFO sources. You know, the History Channel or something? Yeah, okay.
So Nick, we said all of this to come back to where you started with Shema, that we are all one, regardless of where we are in this glorious galaxy. And from
Yes.
whatever planet, we are all one.
Yes, ma'am.
I shall remember.
And then those of us who realize it can make a difference in those who don't.
That is what we're here to do.
Even though they're kicking and screaming in the other direction.
Pretty much.
I want to know. I want to know.
Nope, because you got to give up your egotistical addictions, and that is difficult to do. That is why, as Black Elk said, the first piece is one you develop within yourself. You got to deal with your own addictions to whatever extent or whatever they are. And then you will know how to deal with it on a wider level. And you will be influencing the wider consciousness. Well, everyone, there's no other questions or anything you want to bring up. I think we can go ahead and close out for today.
Good.
Thanks, Nick.
All right. Thank you all. I will not be here next week, but I will be back the following week.
Will you be with us tomorrow?
Oh, yes, I'll be here tomorrow too.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.